Welcome everyone to today's expert insight entitled, Are You Building a Resilient Business? And I'm very happy to welcome Bill Flynn here with us today. Bill has more than 30 years of experience working with and advising hundreds of companies, including startups. He has a long track record of success. He's had 5 successful outcomes, 2 IPOs, 7 acquisitions, one of which included a turnaround during the 2008 financial crisis. And Bill's also a multi-certified growth coach and is part of the very prestigious Marshall Goldsmith MG 100 coaching group. He is also the bestseller of the author of Further Faster. The digital PDF of the book is going to be available for download to all of our members. We're going to put that link into the chat in a moment. Today, Bill is going to help us discover a framework to refocus on the future and better prepare for the next inevitable economic impact. I think we're all coming back from COVID and the pandemic and looking forward to the next year and refocusing on that future. So it's going to be a great, inspiring talk today with Bill. Any questions that you have during the presentation, just put those in the chat and we will get to them at the question and answer segment of today's session. Thank you, Bill, and I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, cool. Thanks, Carrie Ann. So thanks for the bio. So basically what Carrie Ann was saying is that I've made a ton of mistakes in my career. Hopefully I've learned from them and I'm trying to share with others what I've learned. That's my goal. My purpose is called Simplified Servanthood. I'm trying to help leaders figure out how to run businesses in a really productive way, efficiently and effectively. I've been studying business for about 30 years, really intensely in the last 4 or 5. And that's kind of what the book is. It's kind of a sort of a semi-memoir, but it really crystallizes what I've learned over the last 30 years. And I've found that there are some patterns of businesses that do really well. I'm going to talk about those today. So let me share my screen. I am going to use the chat. I'm going to ask you guys to participate in the chat. I'm going to have a couple questions. So feel free to use that, but let me pull up the presentation. All right. So Carrie Ann, is that up?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So here's the first, I'm going to ask you 2 questions to start. One is, how much time do you spend working in the business versus on the business? And I'd like you to put that in the chat as a ratio. So if it's 80% in the business and 20% on, do 80-20. If it's 50-50, whatever it is, just throw that in the chat. All right, let me pull up the chat here. 80-20, 80-20, 95-5, 75-25. Got it. So these are numbers. So I've been a Vistage speaker for about 3 or 4 years, and I asked the same question, and these are the answers I give. Somewhere between 80 and 90% in, and 10 to 20% on the business. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you what I've learned at a very high level, that there is a way to accurately predict the future of your business by focusing on a few things. One of the first things you need to do is begin to fire yourself from the day to day. So if you were able to more accurately predict your company's future 3 years rolling by creating it, what would that mean to you? Think about it for a minute and put it in the chat if you would. It can be a word, a phrase, a sentence, whatever you want to do. But what would that mean to you if you're able to do that? Or your team, if you don't run the entire business, if it's your team or your department, your division, whatever it might be. All right, so let's see what some of those say. Start setting up my exit strategy. Nice. Stability and peace of mind. Better future with more flexible schedule. Freedom to pursue what's next and what's now. Anyone else? Less stress. There you go, Adam. I'm with you. So this is what I hear a lot, is that, we're sucked into the business on a day-to-day basis, and it's hard to get the time and the energy to be able to think about the future, which is about thinking, not doing. If you're running the business, you're doing. And I'm a neuroscience geek, and the brain doesn't do that well. It can't focus on 2 things well. It really only does one thing at a time. And if you context switch a lot, it actually diminishes your ability to do higher level cognitive thinking, which is really creating the future. So that's what I'm going to talk about here over the next half an hour, give or take. But first, I'm going to give you the bad news, is that the longer you're in business, the more likely it is, statistically, at least in the US, to go out of business. You have a 50% chance of lasting 5 years, about a 25% chance of lasting 15, and about a 16% chance of lasting 25. For me, this is counterintuitive because usually the longer you do something, the better you get at it. But this doesn't seem to be what's happening. And I think part of it is that you get distracted by the day-to-day and you lose touch with the things that got you to growing in the first place. So you see most businesses die, very few thrive, but there are also a ton of businesses that don't die, but they struggle on a regular basis. They're guessing at what's coming next. And they're sort of living month to month, quarter to quarter, maybe even year to year. And I'm here to tell you that is completely preventable. There is a science behind running a business. There are things that really great businesses do over the long term that allow them to endure and thrive. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So let's talk a little bit about, we'll do a little more bad news first. So I'm a 10-time startup guy, and this the startups is always about the hockey stick, right? The VCs or the investors want you to do the hockey stick. And those of you who have started businesses know that that's sort of what you're striving for. But those of you who've been doing it for a while know that it's a myth. Most businesses do not have a hockey stick. Most businesses look like this, is you struggle a little bit, and then something happens. There's an inflection point and you start to go up. But at some point, if you stay on that path and you're not continually learning and investing back into the business, it'll start to trail off. And there are lots of reasons why. Here are a few of them. I did just a Google search a number of years ago, and I asked people, et cetera, give me some reasons why you think businesses go out of business. And I started to write them down. In the Google search, at 35 answers, I stopped. And there are lots of other ways. So it's actually really easy to go out of business. Some here are overexpansion, poor business model, the business outgrows the people, you repeat critical mistakes, you do poor hiring. There are lots of ways to affect the business's growth. And the reason that I encourage people to focus on firing yourself from the day-to-day so you can focus on the future, because that's your job now. If you're a leader of the business, either it's yours or you're part of the leadership team, your job isn't running the day-to-day of your department or the organization. It is teaching others to do that, because your job should be spent most of the time on predicting the future. And the reason you do that is your main job is to predict the next growth curve. And as soon as your business starts to do well, you should start to shed your day-to-day so then you can figure out what's next, what's going to happen. A great example here is Apple, since most of us know Apple. And this is what happened. Steve Jobs got fired, and then John Sculley took over. And John Sculley nearly bankrupted Apple. They had 90 days of cash left when Steve Jobs came in the second time because they overexpanded. Most businesses die not of starvation, but of indigestion. And so Steve came in and immediately said, we got to save this thing. So he shed 19 businesses and cut it down to the 4 main businesses that were the most profitable, and said, we need to buy time because I don't really know what's next. We need to figure it out. And those of us who follow Apple, iTunes and the iPod was the next thing. And then you can see this, if you imagine this into the future. So imagine iTunes and iPod is this one, then the iPhone is the next one, the iPad is another one, the watch is the next one, the TV, et cetera. They just keep adding growth curves to their business. And that's what really good businesses do and leaders do, is they add these things. And how do they do that? What I found in my research, there are 3 things that really great businesses that thrive over long periods of time do. And they focus on the fact that performance is a team sport. Most people in businesses are on a team of some kind. There's research done by ADP, and the research said 83% of, I think, were 19,000 people that were asked were on at least one team. About 70% of those people were on 2 teams or more. And some of those teams weren't even on the org chart. They were sort of ephemeral teams. They pop up, something would happen, they'd solve a problem, and then they would go away. Yet we don't teach our leaders how to be great team leaders. The next thing is if you want to grow your business in a steady way, you need to think of it as a system. And I'm going to talk a little more in depth on that. And it needs to be coherent. And then the last thing is, if you want to grow, cash should be your primary financial growth metric. Why? Because cash is an antecedent to growth. You have to invest in front of growth in order for it to happen. You have to hire a little more people, a few more people. You may have to invest in some technology or a building or something like that to prepare for growth. So when I work with my clients, we focus on what do you want to do really intensely in the next 3 years? And then we break it down into 1 year and quarterly chunks. And then we say, great, how much is that going to cost to get to that goal of the 3-year goal? And then we build our plans to generate the cash to do that. Revenue is a wonderful thing, but it's vanity. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. If you want to grow your business in a regular way that survives, especially things like COVID or 2008 or 9/11, et cetera, you have to have cash in order to do that. And many businesses, unfortunately, are going out of business because they didn't have enough cash in the bank. This was certainly unusual with COVID, but it's happened every 6 to 8 years, at least in the US. There's some sort of economic impact to the world. Okay, so let's review a little bit. So what do successful leaders do? Successful leaders realize that there is a meaningful gap between what science knows and business does. There is a lot of great information out there that's been proven to work over and over and over again. Yet we don't look at it. We use intuition and conventional wisdom, which is almost always wrong, instead of actually checking, does that really make sense? The second is the businesses that do really well, they focus on a few things that truly matter to the team and the key stakeholders, and they focus relentlessly and rigorously on those few things. The best example I can give of this is Southwest Airlines here in the US. Southwest is the second largest airline in the world, at least it was until COVID hit. And they only really work in a very small part of the world. But they focus on a very few things. They focus on low fares, lots of flights, lots of fun. That's what they do. Everything they do is focused on getting a plane in the air. Every day, every decision they make, does it get the plane in the air faster or not? And then lastly, you have to value deduction before production. Especially those of us in America, we like to do stuff. We want to get going. But sometimes we get going a little too quickly. If we took a minute to think about it a little bit, we maybe would make slightly different decisions. So thinking about, I think a good example of this is customers. I often ask clients, and I'm a 2-time CMO, and I'm a big fan of Steve Blank and Clayton Christensen with Jobs to be Done and customer development. And I've often asked CEOs, and I've asked my CEOs, why do you think our customers buy from us? And then they give me their answers. I'll tell you 90% of the time, they're wrong. Because when they go out and ask their customers why they buy from us, they buy for different reasons. And I'll tell a story a little bit later on that. So those are the 3 things that successful leaders do. That's what I've done in my research. What I've found is that they realize there's a meaningful gap between what science knows and business does. They focus on the few things that truly matter, because those that do matter tremendously, and they understand that. And then they do a little more thinking ahead of time. Again, they work more on the business than in the business. All right. So back to our hockey stick here. This is what we all want for a growth perspective, but it never happens that way. As everyone knows, growth comes in waves, and it goes up and down, and you have to sort of ride the waves, et cetera. But if you look at growth from the beginning and the end, you're trying to realize some long-term vision. If you're the founder of a company or you took over, you have some vision of what this thing looks like. You need to make sure people understand that, because that's where you're going. If you want to be a leader, people need to follow you, and they follow you because they want to know where they're going. You need to be very clear. Most leaders I work with have a vision in their head, but they don't share it, or they think everyone knows what it is. All the leaders I work with write down their vision, especially their 3-year version of the vision. And then secondly, at the other end, you'll see what I call identity. And these are your core principles, values, purpose, customer objectives, those types of things. Many businesses that go out of business, what they do is they grow for growth's sake, and they violate some of their identity. And if you grow for growth's sake, that's the ideology of a cancer cell. You want to grow in a measured way, in a way that helps people. So when you have an idea to grow, you want to check it against your values and principles and purpose and customers. Is this something that's really going to work for folks? And then you got to lay out a number of things. This is a group that probably knows this. You have a BHAG, some sort of, I like to call it a courageous consequence. I actually think BHAG is a misnomer. because it's an unknown. There's not a lot of specificity to a BHAG in terms of timing. There might be specificity in terms of metrics, et cetera. And then you need to break that thing down in 10, 20, 30 years into what are we going to do in the next few years? I like to think about things in terms of a 3HAG, which is a bit of a riff on BHAG, which stands for 3-year highly achievable goal. This is something you think you can do. It probably is a stretch, but you believe it's something you can accomplish, and then you lay it out. And then you write what called a vivid vision around that. And those of you who are familiar with Cameron Herold, I actually buy Cameron's book for all of my clients, and I make them read it, and I make them write a vision. They have 2 to 3 months to write a vision, and share the first draft with their team. Because that gives everyone a clear understanding of this is what it's going to look like if we do this in the next 3 years. Then we break that down into 1-year chunks and then into quarterly chunks. And sometimes you break it down into monthly. And I have some clients that aren't really good at execution, and they break it down into weekly. We do a 13-week process where we just go week by week. What are we going to do each week in each area? Because your job as a leader is to make decisions. So everything you do is in the middle of these 2 things, right? The long-term vision and the identity. All the decisions in the middle should be based on, is it get us closer to our long-term vision? And does it also agree with our core principles like values, purpose, customer, core objective, et cetera? And I'll talk a little bit more about those things as well. So that's generally the world that I live in, and what I believe makes a really great company. So how do you do that? I'm a big fan of metaphor. So we're gonna build a house together, and we're gonna talk about it in terms of a metaphor of a house. So the first part of the house is the foundation. And to me, this is your cultural system. And this comes from people like Simon Sinek and Jim Collins. You as the leader, you are the touchstone. You are the standard bearer of culture. What you do, how you behave, how you act, et cetera, is how everyone else is going to act. You're setting the standard for everyone else. Sure, you guys know this. You should have some sort of core purpose. I talked about mine, simplified servanthood. Core values. What are the immutable rules by which we work? Core objectives. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is something along the lines of like a commander's intent, which means that what are the few things that we do when we're working with our clients and working with our partners? What are the few things that drive us? I'm a big fan of Zingerman's here in the US. It's a deli in Michigan. It was started in the 80s in like 1,200 square feet and a couple $1,000s. It's now a $60 or $70 million business, a set of businesses here. And they have 3, it's all around food. Their core objectives are great food, great service, great finance. And everyone knows these core objectives, from the person who does the trash to the CEO. And when they're thinking of something, when they're working with a client or coming up with a new product or new food thing to work with, they say, is this great food? And they have a set of standards for that. Am I giving great service? And they have a set of standards for that. And is this profitable? Is this something that's going to actually be beneficial to the company? And of course you have the BHAG, which again, I like to think of it as a courageous consequence. And I call it courageous consequence because I love alliteration. But to me, if you have a vision, you have to have courage, because people are going to say your vision is wrong. It's sometimes going to feel wrong. You have to be able to back it up and defend it. And that takes courage to do that. If you do those things and you set these things up well, you will have a consequence. You will reach some level that you didn't think was possible when you set it up. So there's a cultural system. And then nextly, you have to have a cohesive leadership team. To me, cohesive leaders are those who report into the CEO or the CEO relies on to help with the predicting of the future of the business. And cohesive to me means that you know how to fight in a healthy way. Disagreement is good. You want your leaders to challenge what's going on, because cognitive diversity and dissonance helps to create better solutions. At some point, you're going to have to line up on a direction, but having that conversation ahead of time is terrific. Pat Lencioni calls it, you need to tell each other the kind truth, which I really like. And then there's the human system, this is all about A players. A players are the best investment you'll ever make in your business, either by hiring them or growing them. They generally are 2 to 3 times more productive than anyone else in the company, but you don't have to pay them 2 to 3 times. That's why I have the best ROI. And there's a great story I love from, there's a business here in the US called The Container Store. I actually don't know if it's international. And it's basically, it's a big box store which sells empty boxes. So if you want to store things, et cetera, or fix your closet, whatever it may be. They've been around for almost 40 years, I think. And it is a company that falls into the conscious capitalism movement with, John Mackey of Whole Foods and a whole bunch of other folks. Kip Tindell is the owner and the founder. And his job was, he said, look, we need to have all of these things in place, and we need to make sure we hire the best kind of people. And for him, the best kind of people were people who love to sort and organize. And if you could find those people, then he would teach them how to do the business side. And he did that. And they're basically a retail organization. And most retail organizations have a huge turnover, 100% turnover, give or take, over months or years. He has an 18% turnover, which means he has people in his business that have been there for 30 plus years, and they sell empty boxes, and they love it. And he has a ton of A players. He invests a lot of money in them. In actual money, I think they make about 2 times more than the average in terms of salary, but they're 3 times more productive. So it's an excellent investment. And then lastly, rounding out sort of the frame and the foundation are the team leaders. These are the people that report into the head of company, and then everyone else, frontline workers, middle managers, et cetera. So if you'll notice, everything around here, this is all about people, right? People are what holds things up. And one thing I teach, so I'm a neuroscience geek, and one thing I teach my leaders is, in order to be the best possible leader you can, you have to realize that we're all crazy. We're all irrational, impulsive, and highly emotional beings. That's how we work. When you realize that, you'll have more compassion for yourself and for others. Our brain works against us. It wasn't designed to do what we're asking it to do, at least not automatically. So when you make a decision, the emotional centers of your brain light up first. And your emotional centers don't have language. They were created a very long time ago when language wasn't a thing. So you actually make up the reasons after the fact. And so that's one thing I'd say. You need to understand that. You need to at least have a general understanding of the brain and how it works, because it doesn't work the way I was taught when I was a kid, or I thought. And when you lead with the brain in mind, you manage this people part of the business in a much different way, and typically a much better way. So you have the people frame and foundation. And then, of course, just like any house, you have to run it, right? You have to have food, appliances, heating, electricity, all those things. In our business, there are 3 things inside the house. That's your strategic system, your execution system, and those lead to your cash system. So when I ask lots of people, and I won't do it here, but I would ask you, if you're a leader of an organization, this is an excellent question to ask in your Monday senior leadership team meeting, or Tuesday, whatever it is ask everyone on your senior leadership team to write down in their own words, what is our current company strategy? And then have them read it out loud to each other. So I'll ask you this, I'll stop for a second and ask you, so if you were to do that, what do you think would happen? Write that in the chat. Oops, sorry. Trying to find the chat. There it is. Okay. Blank stares from Adam. Thank you, Adam. Lots of variety, no clarity. They would say, go for anything that crosses our path. Diverse points of view. What's the strategy? I love that, Jim. I do ask that. Excellent. Yeah, so what I get is I get a lot of smiles and a lot of laughs. And so here's the deal. If your job is to build a great business, and a lot of what you're doing is executing, my question to you is, what are you executing on? And generally you're executing on a strategy. Many times I talk to leaders and they're very frustrated with their team or the organization. They're not hitting goals right. They're doing the wrong things. They're missing deadlines, whatever it might be. These are all execution operational problems. And then I ask them this question, I say, well, if they're not clear on what the actual strategy is and they're executing on the strategy, they're probably executing beautifully on what they think the strategy is. And you're getting frustrated because you haven't got them all literally on the same page. What is our strategy? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Again, I use Southwest just because they're most people know who they are and they're a great example. and their strategy is relatively well known. It's called Wheels Up. And that's their one phrase strategy. And that means that, again, as I mentioned earlier, their job is to get the planes in the air. Everything they do is about getting the planes in the air. And supposedly, if you walked up to like a flight attendant or someone who checks you in on Southwest and said, hey, I was just curious, I read this thing. Do you know what the Southwest strategy is? They should all be able to say wheels up. They all know what it is. They've been taught it and they're reminded of it on a regular basis. And that's thousands and thousands and thousands of people who know what it is. And of course, as you said, in a smaller group, I'm assuming some of your businesses are small in Southwest, even the senior leadership team doesn't know what the strategy is. So you got to have at least a decent strategy, and then you start executing it, and then you get better and better and better at the strategy. You find out where the holes are, where the flaws were, what you thought the customers want, what they didn't want, what you thought the competitors were good at but weren't, etc. The things that are around here are just a number of the exercises that I do with clients. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on each one. And then execution, again, which is one of the most popular things that people talk to me about, to me is the simplest of all the things I teach. Execution is only three things, right? One is, what are our priorities? What are the few things that we need to get done this month, this quarter, this year to get us closer to our vision, where we want to go? That's one. They have to be written in a clear way, right? I'm a big fan of SMART. You can use FAST or whatever it is, doesn't matter, but make sure it's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, or something like that. But basically, people need to get it. And what I say is, when you write your priorities down, you shouldn't write them for the people in the room. You should write them for the next person you're going to hire. And if they read this, they could understand it without asking anyone. The next thing is, of course, metrics, right? How do we know when we did the thing we said we wanted to do? And some people have way too many metrics. I'm a big fan of 1 or 2 metrics on each of these key things. And then lastly is meetings. And to be honest with you, we suck at meetings. We just really suck at meetings. Meetings almost always devolve into status updates and people pounding their chest and showing off. But that's not what the meeting should be about. The meeting should be about moving things forward, making progress in whatever it is, in the company, in the project, in the business, in the division. You should be meeting to move things forward. And those things you're moving forward are things that are your priorities or things that are supporting your priorities, because that's what you said is the most important things that we should be doing. But often we don't do that. We spend way too much time doing things that don't matter. And spend a lot of time on it. So I go into a lot of depth. I actually sit in on 2 or 3 of my clients' meetings just to observe and throw out some suggestions and things. I also give them some ideas. You can go to my website, which will be at the end, and I actually have a suggested set of meeting agendas for the daily huddle, the weekly one-on-one, the weekly meeting, and then the monthly meeting. And it's based upon stuff from, I like the stuff from Gino Wickham on EOS. I like the stuff that, from Drucker has some stuff as well on how to run really good meetings. Cameron Herold has some good stuff on meetings as well. And then if you have a strategy and you're executing it, so strategy is top line, execution is bottom line. If you do those things really well and you get better and better at it, you generate cash. And you have to understand that as much as you can, your job is to generate cash if you want to grow. And you want to grow in a healthy way. Once you do that, then you'll realize that cash is the only metric on your P&L or your balance sheet that will not lie to you. Every other line can lie. You can make up profit. You can pay yourself less. You can move money around. But either you have the cash or you don't. One of the things that I advise all of my heads of company to do is just get one report once a week or so from their CFO or their controller, which is not a cash flow statement, which is fine, but it's a real simple statement. It has 4 things in it. 1, what did we start the period with? So let's say it's a month. What did we start the month with in terms of cash? What did we end the month with in terms of cash? And then the 2 things in the middle are, how much cash did we generate during the month and how much cash did we spend during the month? Get that every week. Most of the time you're going to look at it and just toss it aside. Great, I get it, looks good. But once in a while, you're going to see something that surprises you. And this will help you be in front of problems, right? I think really great leaders don't focus as much on the problem that's in front of them, but they focus on the problem that's creating the problem that's in front of them. And if they keep focusing back on the problem that's creating the problem, and they do it again and again and again, they'll eventually get to the root cause of the problem. And once you fix that and you teach everyone how to do it, then it's something you don't have to do. You won't have to fix, you won't have to have emergency sessions, you won't have fire drills, that kind of stuff. The last thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to stop, as I know Carrie Ann is thinking, all right, he's got to stop talking soon, is if you have a great house, that's terrific, but you also have to make sure it doesn't sink into the ground. So you have to have bedrock underneath. You have to have a strong foundation underneath the house itself. And to me, this is what I call the foundational system. It's based upon what I already mentioned, the vivid vision. You do two things as a leader. You're a change agent, because if you want to grow, you have to change, and you're a decision maker. I recommend and strive for my clients to have a change process framework, meaning here's how we do change. We do it the same way. It's the same process no matter what we do. If we're moving a mailbox from here to here, or we're doing a 2-year vision, they're about change. We do the same way. Decision making, you should have some sort of decision making framework. I'm a big fan of the Canoven framework. And I like the Heath brothers as well. I put those two together with my clients, but I don't actually care what they use as long as they have one and it works for them. And then lastly is neuro leadership. Again, I already mentioned this. People are crazy, right? If you're gonna grow your business, you need to have learners, and you need to understand how the brain learns. The brain doesn't learn the way we're taught, at least in the US. It isn't taught by pouring stuff in. The brain learns in a completely different way. You have to sort of understand that, and that will help you to make sure that people get what you do and can be able to repeat it. Helped you with coaching and growth, etc. So that's the basic foundation of the system. And then here's what it looks like. I won't go into a lot of detail. You can actually see this on my site. This is my one-page plan. Everything that I just did in the house, I do for myself, and I update it every quarter. These are actual numbers. This isn't a dummy thing. This is Q4 of this year. And you'll see I'm looking to hopefully make about $215,000 this year as a coach. It was a tough year for me. I was actually doubling every year until COVID, but I'll take 215. That's really good. You'll see my core values on the left: purpose, BHAG, objectives, all the way down to my quarterly planning. That's what I build. This thing, first time out, takes about 18 to 24 months to build and have you feel like we got it, and feel good about it, because some of these things take a little time and energy. So quick review takeaway. Most businesses die or struggle, very few thrive. The leader's main job is to predict the future, not run the day-to-day. And I know this falls on a spectrum, depending on your size of business. Sometimes you have to be a player coach, you have to be in there. But if you keep that in mind, that what can I get rid of? What can I move off to my team? What can I stop doing that isn't valuable? The more you keep that mindset, the more time you'll have to predict the future. And you want to create a growth framework that systemizes your business. You want 3 keys: performance is a team sport. You want to build a coherent system, especially around strategy and execution. And then your key growth metric should be cash. So there's 2 takeaways. One is buy Cameron Herold's book and write your vivid vision. It's a pain in the neck. It's really hard and it's daunting. But once you do it, your employees will love it. Why? Because I've seen it happen live. Every single one of my leaders write one, and the team loves it. They have great accolades for having it done. The other thing you can do, and you can download this from my site, this is part of my book, is you can check in with them and just have everyone on your senior leadership team go through this checklist and just score, how are we doing 1 to 10? And then talk about it. I do this with a lot of clients. It's how I do my first session with my clients. I do a free session with my clients at the beginning, and I have them go through this. It is amazing. You'll think that you know what your leaders are thinking. I've never had it happen where the leader knows exactly what everyone's thinking. There are always surprises when they go through the checklist. And that's based on my book, which is this thing right here, Further Faster. And that's it. How did I do? Oh, look at that. I beat it by 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. I'm going to open it up now to, I just put in the chat, the checklist and book, the link that they'll just put up there so that you guys can just click on that and visit it. And you can download both the checklist and the book in PDF format. And I'm going to open it up to question and answer now. So I'm going to let you guys, you can either write them in the chat, or I'm going to allow you to unmute, and you can also ask verbally as well.
Stop sharing. I'll get rid of that so we can see each other. Yeah, Mike Kleiss, I love that Panera quote. Our job is to figure out today what will matter tomorrow, which isn't easy. Predicting the future is not easy. And mostly you don't predict the future, you create it. Is you try to figure out what it is and then you create it. That's why these people are successful. They actually create their own futures.
Bill, this is Rick. You mentioned neuro leadership several times. Yeah. I saw David Rock's last name on your pillars. Could you just give us a high level of why you think neuro leadership is so important, and what you give to your clients as far as the understanding from neuro leadership?
Yeah, so neuroleadership is, again, leading with the brain in mind. And our brains were not designed for thinking. Our brains were designed for survival. I like to say your brain is, the job of the brain is to keep the plumbing and the scaffolding underneath it going. And it works against us on a regular basis. The reason it does that is because its main job is to keep you alive. So it moves towards reward and away from threat. And the SCARF model from the Neuroleadership Institute, I love. I think it's a great representation of it. It makes it simple. For those of you who don't know what it is, SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And these are the things that your brain, supposedly every 5 times a second, supposedly your brain is checking friend or foe, safe or not, threat or reward. Because our ancestors were good at it. If they weren't good at it, you wouldn't be here. So that's what it's doing on a regular basis. It's not thinking about, rational things. We are not economists. Our brains are not economists. We are humans, which means we're irrational. Dan Ariely is one of my favorite guys. He talks about being irrational and predictably irrational. So that's what I teach. I combine a little bit of Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions with SCARF. I do it at the same time. And I just say, the example I give is, I think, pretty universal, no matter where you are in the world. Either you've done it by mistake or you've had it done to you. And that is, so let's say you're in a meeting, you're running the meeting. I'll do it with Carrie Ann. So Carrie Ann's my boss and I'm running the meeting. She's sitting there with me and the meeting ends and she taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, Bill, I have a few things I want to talk about with that meeting. Can you follow me back to my office?" And that's it. What happens? My brain starts to go into overdrive. What did I do wrong? Am I going to get fired? If I get fired, am I going to be able to send the kids to college? Are we going to buy that house? We're going to do that vacation this year. So by the time I sit down at her office, which is a status symbol, when she sits behind her desk, which is another status symbol, my brain is in full threat mode. And I don't care what she says to me. I'm not really listening because my brain is saying, get the hell out of there, right? You're sweating a little bit. Maybe your heart is pumping. That's your brain saying, go, run away. And it completely shuts off stuff it doesn't need. And you don't need your frontal cortex, which is your critical thinking part, because you just need your old part, which is your brainstem and your limbic system. So here's another way she could have done that. Is she could have said, "Hey, Bill, that was a really good meeting. Sit down next to me and say, as you know, Kaizen is one of our principles, one of our core values. And I want to make this the best meeting we possibly can make. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you to put a lunch or a coffee on my schedule in the next week. And I'd like to have you come to it with these things. Bring 3 things that you thought went really, really well in that meeting. Bring 1 or 2 things that you thought that, hey, if we did it better, it would make it an even better meeting. I will do the same thing. And you and I are going to meet every week until we both agree that this is about the best possible meeting we could have." Completely different way to do it. Same outcome. No status was triggered. No certainty. No autonomy. No, it seemed fair. Same thing could have worked really well, but we do it, right? We're busy. We're thinking. We're like, I just got to get her back to my office. I just want to tell her a couple things. We're telling her a couple things. And by the way, when she brought me back to her office, she might have said, "Hey, Bill, that was a really good meeting. I just want to tell you, I really liked it." But again, because she did what she did, my brain kicked into its instinct, which is caveman, and it didn't work. So that's what I mean by lead with the brain in mind. I hope that answers your question.
Hey, Bill, this is Jim Neidhart from New Jersey. For some of our members that may not be, familiar with the work of Jim Collins and Vern Harnish and people like that, could you just give a simple definition of the BHAG and the 3HAG and how they might relate to each other?
Sure.
In a little more depth?
Sure. So Collins and Vern are great, and Gino, et cetera. But by the way, they're all doing the work of Edgar Schein, Peter Drucker, Edward Deming. These are thinkers that are like last century. And we're just regurgitating. We're doing the same things over and over again. But I love what I love about Jim Collins more than anyone is he doesn't say, "Hey, let me figure out how I can make a business out of this." He says, "Why are these things successful? And let me work backwards to figure out, are there any patterns?" Right? He uses basically science. He uses the scientific method says what he does. So one of the things they came up with was the BHAG. And the BHAG basically stands for big, hairy, audacious goal. It means something that, hey, you know, when we have finished this thing, when this vision is realized, what is that thing that we'll see or experience that will let us know that we did it? It could be a number, it could be a rating, it could be whatever it is. And I'm actually not very sticky with my clients on it has to be a metric, but it has to be something that you can recognize in some way, shape, or form, or justify that you've done it. So that's what a BHAG is. What was the other one? Was there another one, Jim?
The 3HAG.
3HAG. Oh yeah. So this is as you can see, this is my little shirt here. Oh, I'm on the wrong side. 3HAG, which is the organization I'm part of, which is it's in Canada. Metronome United, run by Shannon Sisko, who was just nominated again for the top 100 business leaders in Canada. And that's, again, she's just riffing on Jim Collins' stuff. And that stands for 3-year highly achievable goal. And all that means is, hey, let's set up in 3 years from now, let's say the end of 2023, how much revenue will we have made that year? How much profit will we have made that year? How much cash will we have generated? How many widgets will we have sold? You know, widget is whatever that thing is that is the main thing that you sell. And then how many people will we have in the business? And those are your 3HAG metrics. And then you say, okay, great. Now let's work backwards, because it's a lot easier to work backwards than it is look forwards. You say, okay, how do we do that? What are the things that we need to get better at? What are the 2 or 3, 4 key capabilities that we need to either use more often, invent, or make better? And then, okay, great. Now, which one of those do we do this year? Which part of these do we do this quarter? And you just move back from a BHAG to a 3HAG to a 1HAG to a QHAG.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. What else? We got 15 minutes. I can go in more depth in things. If you want to riff on neuroscience, I'm happy to do that as well.
Hey, Bill,
go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
This is Mike. You kind of mentioned that, you know, there's 3 things that you see effective leadership doing, and you said it a few different ways, but one of them you talked about, they have their few priorities nailed down, like they know what are the important few things. They have metrics, fewer probably ones, right? And they run great meetings. Of those 3 things, what do you typically see missing the most or the most often, I guess, of those 3 practices or those 3 habit things?
Oh, I don't know. I'm going to say
All of them.
Sorry. Which is the top of the stack? So the thing I don't think I'm gonna go off script for you, Mike. Sorry.
Okay.
The thing I see most often missing is the vision. Here's the deal. We have all these great, I'm going to say something really controversial. I don't think leadership is a thing. I think followership is the thing. We should study why people follow, because if you look at Mullally versus Gates, Al Mullally was an extremely successful leader. He's my biggest leader. I know. I think I told Rick this on our thing. Completely different personality than Bill Gates, right? They both were successful in certain ways. But Bill Gates, especially when he was young, he was kind of a jerk. And he had a high standard, and he yelled at people. He became nice after he gave his money away. I don't know what happened. But you've got all these different leaders. You got Elon Musk, and you've got Bob Chapman, right? Bob Chapman is about love. Elon Musk is about get it done now, get it done fast. I don't care if you can't go home. We're doing this thing. We're sending people to Mars. We got a thing, right? So everyone's a little different, but they all seem to have some level of success. I think there's only 2 things that you need to really be good at as a leader. You have to have a compelling vision. Why? Because the only real constituency that separates leaders from others is they have followers. You aren't a leader if you don't have any followers. And following is a voluntary process. You don't make people follow you. They follow you because they want to. Now, if you have authority and you make them go behind you, that's one thing, but that's not followership. And then the second thing you have to have is courage. Because you know what? People are going to tell you your vision's wrong. You're going to have to give up time and energy to other people to run the business for you, which will take courage. Just the fact that you're saying, I want to lead, takes courage. Everything else, I think, is subjective. You can be you have humility or no humility. You have integrity. Steve Jobs did not have a ton of integrity. I'm sorry. He just didn't. He was an awesome guy at what he did, but I have friends who know him. And I met him once, and he was fine with me, but they said, I love Steve's, the way Steve drives the company to do this, but not, man, I can't wait to go over Steve's house for dinner. They didn't want to do that. So that's what I think. So vision and courage are the things that I see most often as the main things in leadership. And so Carrie Ann has my bio. My bio says that we do 10 things wrong. We do people wrong, feedback wrong, vision wrong, hiring wrong, meetings wrong. There are 10 things that we do wrong. Not completely wrong, but being a scientist myself, if you listen to chaos theory or the butterfly effect, tiny errors compound. And if you just do them a little wrong and they add up, that's why I think that curve at the beginning is what it is those things start to add up over time and they become like this tsunami that's working against you. And eventually, because most businesses that succeed, and I won't ask you guys if this is true, most businesses that at least survive, they survive on force of will, luck, effort, and timing. Those don't scale. They just don't. Eventually you run out of bandwidth. So that's what you got to do. Vision.
Hey, Bill, this is great stuff. I see Jeff Perry asked a question. He said, great content. Thank you. What can I do today to start on this path of removing myself from the daily management? I definitely want to head this direction, but I continuously find myself gravitating toward what is familiar, the day to day.
Right. Again, that's your brain working against you, right? The brain likes sameness. The brain likes the familiar. So you don't even know it's doing it to you. So we have 150 unconscious biases working against us. And this is one of them. So it's a great question, Jeff. Here's what I always recommend. If you don't know this, Marcus Buckingham, Love and Loathe. Do the love and loathe. So those of you who don't know what it is, it's really simple. This is what I'll have you do, Jeff. For the next week or week and a half or whatever, some period of time frame that makes sense to you, get a piece of paper and carry it around with you. And on the piece of paper, do a T, and at the top write love, and the other side write loathe. Now, love is, I love doing this. I get energy from it. It gives me strength. When I'm doing it, time flies like crazy. Put it in that column. Don't do anything with it, just put it in the column. And then loathe is the exact opposite. I'm bored, I'm frustrated, 5 minutes feels like an hour. Whenever it's that, put it in there. There's going to be a lot of stuff that don't make the list. Don't worry about it. Just do the extremes first. Your job, and by the way, you should use this with all your team. It's a wonderful exercise. And then you can do it every few months. And then just keep working the list. And your job is then to get stuff off your loathe list first. And so that's Marcus Buckingham. Now there's this guy, Rory Vaden, who's an efficiency expert. So this is what I recommend you do with the loathe list, is go through it and do 4 things. One is automate anything you can automate. So for me, I read somewhere years ago that it takes 8 back and forths to set up a meeting. What a waste of time. I use Calendly. I just give people my calendar and they set up the meeting. I just cut out 7 back and forths multiplied by what times per year. That's a ton of time. So automate anything you can. The next thing is the standard delegate. Is there something that you think one of your team members should get better at that you don't really like to do, so you have to teach them, right? So don't just delegate and say, hey, Rick, do this. Teach Rick how to do it. Now, he may do it differently than you do. And by the way, give him something that's on his love list, but certainly not on his loathe list. Because if you give what you hate to someone who hates it, that's not really moving forward. That's just, what do they call that? That's just passing the buck. The next thing is eliminate. Is there anything that you're doing that you can just eliminate? You've been doing it forever and it would feel weird, but and the last thing is, which is connected, which is procrastinate. Something on your list, just don't do it. If you do this report every week or every month, just stop doing it. And if nobody notices, eliminate it. If someone does, then delegate it or automate it. So there's 4 things, right? So love and loathe. And this is on my website as well. I give all the instructions. It's really Marcus's stuff. It's not my work. One thing I do add for other folks is you can also add long and lust to it. So love, loathe, long, lust. And so some people are doing things that they wish they could do, but they're not. Or some people are wishing they could do things again that they no longer are doing. And then you want to have them be doing the lust, long, and love parts as often as possible. Research from Buckingham says, as long as we're doing something we love about 20% of the time, we are much more highly engaged at work. So just technically 1 day a week. And I think it's sort of like vacation, right? As long as you have something to look forward to. Give your people stuff they look forward to. If you allow them to do things, to me, your job as a leader, that's why you got to fire yourself in the day-to-day, because you have to pay attention to everyone and you have to find the brilliance in others. And when they do something that you're like, my God, that was fascinating, Mike. How did you do that? And interrogate them and figure out how they do that and then get them to do it more. Mine is pattern matching. I love finding patterns. I love crossword puzzles. I love Mensa questions. I love startups. So I do that as often as I can. It's a blast. That's probably a quarter answer to a nickel question, but there it is.
Hey, Bill, you're a student of a lot of great thinkers. I wonder if you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but have you read the book Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman?
Yes, I know Gino. Gino
Okay.
used to be in the organization I'm with, and I have a bunch of EOS friends.
Could you talk about the concept of a visionary and an implementer that is kind of in that book?
Yeah, and by the way, that's the same thing with Steve Blank and others. So Gino is basically, again, taking nothing against Gino, but Gino's like Vern, and like me, he's a curator. Gino is not a thought leader, neither am I, but he's an excellent curator. And I think he does an excellent job with execution. So the general theory is that you need someone to pull you up and someone to keep you on the ground. Visionaries are the ones that pull you up. They're like, they're about the art of the possible. They're not concerned with details, etc., and they want to see the thing grow. They have a vision. They're the visionaries. Right? They're the ones who think out into the future and think this can happen, and they're optimists. Now, of course, if you have a visionary only running a company, guess what happens? You do too many things because they see, well, we could just do that. Just, in my world, and I was a software guy, it was called SMOP. It's just a small matter of programming. We could do that, but if it doesn't tie to your growth or your identity, then it starts to make your company go in multiple different directions. It bifurcates them or more. So the visionary pulls you up, but you also have to have this other person that keeps the visionary on the ground, because you have to say, but that is cold fusion. We can't do that. Or we don't have enough people to do that. How are we going to do that? We can't afford that. And so here's the missing ingredient that I think Gino talks about is those two people have to love each other because they're going to fight all the time. And as long as they fight in a healthy way and have mutual respect for each other, then they'll get a lot more done. Again, if you just have the operator, then you'll just incrementalize, right? You'll be really conservative. You won't take any chances, which is fine. But then you'll hit that curve that I saw, that you'll start to trail off. It'll take years, but it will happen, right? This is what Steve Ballmer did. Steve Ballmer was not a visionary. He took over from Gates, who was a visionary. And even though, I'm not a big fan of Gates's overall style, he still he was great. Ballmer was all about the other guy. And he almost killed Microsoft. And now you got Satya Nadella coming in, and he's like, stop being know-it-alls. And Microsoft was my partner twice. They were know-it-alls. I had a guy that I worked with who had a whiteboard. And I was like, what's the whiteboard there, Ken? He said, oh, those are all the bets I won from everyone, showing them how much smarter I am than they are. So literally, they were know-it-alls. And he talks them into learn-it-alls. So I think that's what you need to do. You need to have those two competing forces working together. And so that's Jobs and Wozniak. That's, pick your two guys, right? There's who's the guy who ran? Howard Schultz, and he had this guy, Bob, who was his operator. You'll see that a lot. I mean, you can certainly do it yourself, but it's more often that's a visionary and integrator. Was that what you wanted me to say, Rick? Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was great.
All right, I think we're coming to the end of our time now. If anyone has one last question, I think we've got 3 minutes left. Otherwise, Bill, I was thinking that maybe we could close a little bit about talking about, I really like the question from Jeff, and I think that a lot of our members and what we've heard from a lot of the different CEOs in our network is the idea of the pandemic kind of making this issue of getting into the day-to-day and the daily grind something that's really difficult to get out of. And maybe we could just end kind of on how would you approach that? And I know that we talked about the day-to-day when we're going into sort of our comfort zone, but maybe some of these things aren't even in our comfort zone. It's just that we've fallen into a place of either distrust, or we're really concerned about what's happening, or we've had some of that cash that we're so focused on cut And we've had to rely a little bit more on our own selves and our own resources to come back out of that, and just kind of close around that. And
Sure. Yeah, well, COVID's just unusual, right? This is,
Yeah.
we haven't had this in 100 years. So there's a few things you have to do, right? You have to remember, you go back to the brain, right? There's threat and reward. And when COVID happened and all these things happened, we were unsure about health, we were unsure about our jobs, we were unsure about economy. People were in constant threat mode. And your job as a leader is to try to mitigate that as much as possible. So what I always recommended was first, and I have this on my site, I have a COVID checklist, which is basically a crisis checklist, right? What would you do in a crisis? And the first thing is, in COVID, is health. Make sure that you're creating an environment where everyone is at least safe from a health perspective. Because if they don't feel safe, then they're not going to be paying attention. They're not going to come to work. They might quit the job, whatever it is. The next thing, of course, is cash. Make sure you have enough cash. But I think to answer your question, Carrie Ann, at a higher level, is I'm a huge fan of the growth mindset. You as a leader have to understand the power of a growth mindset. And to me, if you're not familiar with it, it's really simple. It's, I don't know that yet. The power of the word yet, right? I haven't figured out COVID-19 yet, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep working until I do it. If you keep that mindset, and of course, if you believe it, then you're going to believe it in others, and you will teach them. You'll say, you know what? I don't need to run this company. There's one great story. I'll end one great story, and then we'll go. Is David Marquette, who did Turn the Ship Around, which is a great book. He was a submarine commander in the U.S. Navy, and basically he took over the worst submarine in the Navy. With 2 weeks to go. And generally, Navy commanders that take over subs study for 1 year because they need to know all the answers. They need to know how to run the whole sub. He had no choice. So he gave everyone permission to run the sub. And his job was just to say, okay, do that. And he turned the entire thing around. With a little over 1 year, they became the best performing sub in the entire Navy because he flipped it around. He put the authority down where the decisions were being made. If you can do that as a leader, your job will be so much easier, and you'll be able to move away from the day-to-day as quickly as possible. But just start with one thing, right? Start your love load list and pick one thing. Go from there.
Great. Thank you
Gracias,
so much.
Alfredo.
It was a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you for your presentation. For everyone that's joined us, as usual, you will have access to the presentation and this recording. We'll post everything into our resource center with Team Vibe. And we've posted the links to Bill's site where you can download all of those resources we talked about today. Thank you everyone for joining us. It was a pleasure, and we'll see you all again very soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Cheers.
Bye.